afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bernard Turner from Highlights of Chicago Press. For the last 12 years, I've been a volunteer interpreter at the Chicago History Museum, and I have been the author of several books about Chicago history and culture, including A View of Bronzeville and a children's story that tells the story of the Bud Billiken character. I am very happy to be here today with my colleague and friend, Michelle Duster, to talk about a project that we are actually working on together, a book that will focus on African American history and culture. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks for having me, Bernard.
Tell the audience a little bit about the book that we're working on right now together and the story of how we decided to do it and what was the impetus.
Well, the book that we decided to work on together started as a painting. I was participating in a book fair, and I stumbled upon a painting that had, it looked sort of like the class picture, but it had a lot of different historic figures in it. And what struck me about the picture was not just only the fact that there were so many interesting people included in the photo or the painting, but I realized that a lot of the people in the painting had connections with each other. I knew that certain people in the painting had worked together, that they knew each other, that they had influenced each other, and it just made me start thinking, you know, that none of us live in a bubble.
Exactly.
A lot of people, you know, influenced each other. So it's not like you just have this one person that just stands out in history and they stood alone. And it just made me start thinking maybe this is a story that we can tell on how these different people work together and help people understand that one thing kind of leads to another, that leads to another. And so I mentioned the painting to you, and I thought, well, maybe this is something we can work on together. So, you know, over the course of time, we've sort of, our idea has evolved from what we were originally thinking to now we want to have it be a little bit more of a sort of conversation with the people that are in the painting to help emphasize how much they have influenced each other, even crossing boundaries as far as time frames and things like that.
The painting that you're talking about is called The Time Has Come by Darrell Spicey.
Right.
And we have met and talked with him a lot about our perhaps using that painting as the cover of the book. And it was an interesting interchange, but we have decided not to use that painting as the cover of the book.
Right.
But it will be in the book, and it will factor prominently in the story that we're going to tell. And the actual cover of the book is another painting. It's kind of an offshoot of The Time Has Come, which will be the cover of the book. And one of the other things that I think was important was deciding not to do biographies of the people who are in the painting. And you kind of convinced me that that probably wasn't the best way to go. And why did you think that?
Well, I mean, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, I mean, the initial idea was to have, to focus on each individual person in the book separately and kind of give like an overview of their life and and times and what they did. But then I started looking at other books that have been published and realized that was not a unique idea. And also, one of the things I noticed as for myself as a reader, when I've seen books like that, I tend to focus in on one person or two people. I don't read the book from the front cover to the back cover. I'll just kind of, pick and choose who I'm going to read about. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be a different idea if we created a book that somebody could read from the front page to the back page all the way through, so it's like one continuous kind of a story versus sort of encyclopedia kind of entries, and that would make it different,
and more interactive.
More interactive, yes, and more conversational,
Exactly.
as far as having the characters kind of speak for themselves versus us as authors telling their story. They can kind of tell it themselves, and so it would just be a different way of telling a historic information.
Well, one thing that I think that we have done in bringing this book to light is to figure a way to involve children in the story, and as opposed to just writing writing a book that would be a general story, encyclopedic, as you said. We're going to involve the children. So I think people would be interested in hearing how we're going to involve the children.
Well, yeah, when we first started thinking about the idea, I think the original thought was that it would be an adult book. Right. But then we started thinking, well, maybe we can make it a children's book, because all the people that are in the painting that we wanted to profile are very well-known historic figures. There's an awful lot of information available about each one of the people individually. So it's almost like, why reinvent the wheel? To have more information that already exists. So then it's like, well, how can we tell different information about these individual people? And some of the things that a lot of people might not know unless they read every single person's biography is how these people knew each other. And so how can we tell this information in a way that's not too bogged down in details, but it still kind of flows and shows the interchange between them? And the more we kind of talked about it, the more we said, this could be a way to help children understand that, the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's and the Sojourner Truths did not work alone, that they were part of a society, and people came before them and after them. And so there's sort of a continuum in our history. And so if we kind of simplified the information, then it makes it more accessible to a wider group of people. And we realized that the more you and I talked about it, just sort of batting around ideas, the more we figured grammar school children are the ones that are sort of learning Black history or learning history in general in school. A lot of adults don't necessarily take it upon themselves to learn something new unless they just are history buffs. But children are the ones that are kind of being introduced to this information. And if you can introduce it in a way that's fun and interesting and different, then maybe it makes it something that they would enjoy versus just sort of memorizing facts and figures and just sort of dry information. But this would be a way to make it so that they would maybe want to learn more about these people. And if they want to learn more, there's so much information available out here on the different characters or the different historic figures that they can, take it upon themselves to become, get more detailed information about them. So it would just be a different way to engage and pull children in into being excited about history.
Good. Well, I think that we're about 3/4 done with this book, and I'm really looking forward to it. We haven't given it a title yet, but we're trying to think of something that's going to grab people's attention and really interest kids in history. And from my point of view, I have become more interested in not only Chicago history, but U.S. history. And this book is giving me a lot of ideas about our country and you know, the history of our country, the politics and the issues that we have today, and has really made me want to give my knowledge back to the young people that are coming up in school today.
Right. I mean, the bottom line, I mean, we both went through school already. So I mean, things might be a little different now than they were when we were in grammar school, but the basic thing is that, you know, there's a point where you're learning something for the first time. And the more interesting and engaging and frantic, entertaining in a way that you can make something, then the more children want to learn more. So I think, you know, our goal, our hope is that what we're creating will be something that children will literally enjoy reading, and it will make them want to know more. And I mean, my interaction with children is that sometimes, you know, there are some children who find history to be a little dry, a little boring, and they don't see how it relates to them as individuals. And the characters can be so removed, and the time period is so removed from what they're dealing with today. So we wanted to create a character in the book that has some of the same ideas about history and about doing his homework that maybe some of the children who would be reading the book would feel. So they would not only be able to have the opportunity to learn about these historic figures, but also feel like they can relate to the character of the child that we've created for this book. So we, through this character, will be expressing some of the same sentiments as maybe some of the children who will be reading the book. So they will feel like they're taking the journey through reading the book that the character is also taking in learning about these historic figures. So they're kind of going on this journey. The reader and the character in the book are kind of going on the journey together.
Right. I think it's going to be a very good book, and I hope people will check it out when it's ready. I was interested in some of your experiences writing books, other books, or working on other material that you already have published. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, to date, I've published 2 books that have the original writings of my ancestor. My great-grandmother was Ida B. Wells. And a lot of people in Chicago, when they hear the name Ida B. Wells, the first thing that comes to their mind is the housing community that was named after her, which doesn't exist anymore. And after the housing community that was part of Chicago for over 60 years was, you know, slowly but surely eliminated, my concern as a descendant of hers was that I did not want her name to disappear from Chicago's memory. And then, I mean, there has been an increase in interest in her from several scholars around the country, and they've published books that are more sort of for college-age students and maybe scholars or history buffs, like really hardcore history buffs, that want to know information about her. But I started feeling like that's wonderful, and I'm happy that people are creating those kind of works. But I wanted to create something that would sort of be in between a children's book and a scholarly piece of work. And I also wanted Ida, my ancestor, to be able to speak for herself, because she was a writer. She was a very famous journalist, and she had an enormous amount of work published. So I decided to collect her writings and reproduce them in a way that people today can read her words the same way that people during her lifetime read them. So what I had seen other people publish about my ancestor was sort of summaries of her work, or maybe excerpts of her work, but I had never seen anybody publish all of her work in entirety without editing and without commentary and without interpretation. So I published 2 different books that had 2 different pieces of her writing that I did not edit, and I did not even make, you know, corrections. There were some typos in her original work, and I decided to reproduce with the typos and with, you know, maybe some inconsistencies and things like that, because I felt like that was more true to what she really did, and it would help people see today exactly how she had published her own work. So I took one book, I reproduced her pamphlet, The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition, which was published in 1893 around the World's Fair. There was a lot of controversy around the World's Fair regarding the participation or lack of participation for African Americans in the fair, and she published a pamphlet that she distributed at the fair. And then the second book that I published...
this was the one of her writings abroad, right?
Right. The second one, which she wrote in 1894, she went to England and did a speaking tour for 4 months, and she wrote a series of newspaper articles that were published here in Chicago about her travels. It was almost like a travel log. It was kind of like she was a foreign correspondent, and she talked about what she was experiencing in England. And I just thought that was a piece of writing that I had never seen anybody else even really talk about in depth. That was one of her least published pieces of work. And so I felt like it was important to bring that out of the archives and make it accessible for today's audience, because the more I read her writing, the more I felt amazed that some of the things that she was writing about in the late 1890s is not that different than what we're dealing with in the 2000s.
For example, give us an example of that.
I mean, for example, the struggle that women have between motherhood and careers, and how, you're trying to balance, your responsibilities. I mean, I think women today are still dealing with those kind of issues. I think that the way that the publishing industry works today, as far as propaganda about African Americans or women, is still here today. There's a small number of individuals who own most of the media, and that's true today as well as how it was true during her time, and how the truth, or a different version of what's going on in our world, is not as accessible now at the same way it wasn't accessible during her time. And that's why it's important to have media outlets that are independent, because you have these conglomerates that own the majority of the media outlets. I mean, from radio, television, newspapers. Now you have the internet and all of that. And during her time, obviously, there were only newspapers. But she talked a lot about that, how people would get their perceptions about what was going on in her time based on newspapers that were printed by, huge organizations or wealthy individuals, and they owned most of the press.
So it's like owning the press and commandeering the knowledge that people get, or the news that people get.
Exactly, and that shapes people's attitudes about things, because what was going on during her time was, an amazing amount of discrimination, which included lynching of mostly men, mostly African Americans, and a lot of people felt that the lynchings were justified because the media that was covering the crimes that people were committing were very skewed towards a certain point of view. And so my ancestor, Ida B. Wells, felt that the media has to be owned by more than one point of view, and she actually owned a newspaper, the Memphis Free Speech. Her husband, Ferdinand Barnett, owned the Chicago Conservator before they got married. And she actually worked for the Chicago Defender for a little while after she moved back to Chicago.
A lot of people don't know that she worked for the Defender.
Right. She actually was a columnist with the Defender. And I know a lot of people don't know that her stepson, one of Ferdinand's sons that he had from a previous marriage, ended up being an editor. His name was Albert Barnett, and he was an editor for years with the Chicago Defender. So there was a very strong connection between my family members and the Chicago Defender. I mean, in addition to other newspapers that were owned by African Americans. So, you know, she, as well as her husband, felt very strongly that we needed to own our own media outlets so that what's going on in our community can be covered in well, first of all, be covered at all.
Right.
And then secondly, if they are covered, be covered more truthfully.
And a lot of people don't know that the Defender was not the only African American owned newspaper in Chicago. There was the Chicago Bee, there was the Intercontinental, or I can't think of the name of it. But there were maybe 4 or 5 different newspapers that started in the African American community other than the Chicago Defender that played a real big role in the neighborhood, in the community.
Right. Well, the Conservator, which was owned by my great-grandfather Ferdinand Barnett, was the first black-owned newspaper in Chicago, and he started it in 1878. And it lasted until 1914.
Wow.
The Chicago Defender started in 1905.
1905, yeah.
So, I mean, he was several decades before the Chicago Defender started. And, I mean, a lot of people really don't know about the Conservator because it folded so long ago. But it was actually published in Quinn Chapel here in Chicago on 29th and Wabash.
24th and Wabash.
24th and Wabash. And I mean, there's just so much history here in Chicago of our history, and I think that's one of the things that we were trying to do with this book, is to help people understand that Frederick Douglass and IDA B. Wells and Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker and George Washington Carver and all these different people. Several people either were from or spent a great deal of their lives in Chicago.
Right.
But even if they weren't from Chicago, they still influenced each other. It's interesting. I think a lot of people don't understand that there was a lot of cross-communication between people around the country.
Right.
Even way back in the day before telephones.
Before the internet
before
and
the
texting.
internet. Yes, I mean, there was communication between people who lived in New York, people who lived in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Philadelphia, Memphis. I mean, back in the 1800s, so there was a lot of collaboration between people, during these times. And hopefully our book can help people understand that and be encouraged by how innovative people were pre-internet.
Right. Well, that's really very interesting, and I think that's something that we're going to be able to accomplish with this book, and I'm looking forward to people having the opportunity to read it. One of the other things we talked about was other kinds of historical information that we are working on and learning about. And one of the things that I'm working on right now, besides our book, is I'm on the board of directors of the Camp Douglas Restoration Foundation. And Camp Douglas, as you know, was a Union camp in Chicago that was opened in the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. And many Illinois soldiers joined the Union Army there. But what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of African American soldiers also joined the Civil War there, and they were trained there. And one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to bring that story alive, and we want to be able to tell the students and the children in the schools about Camp Douglas and the history that's there. And this summer we had a archaeological excavation near the Pershing East Magnet School at 31st and Rhodes. And we had a dig that was co-sponsored by Northern Michigan University and Loyola University, where they dug to try to find some remnants of this camp. And we will be doing that again next year. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing, and we would like to invite people to be involved in that as well.
Well, I think the more, the more people understand the rich history that we have in Chicago, but in Bronzeville in particular, is really important. A lot of people, when they think about African American history, the first thing that comes to their mind is Harlem.
Right.
And they don't necessarily know how much happened in Chicago, specifically Bronzeville. And but we know, and we hope to help people learn and remember that Bronzeville was a very, very rich area of our city when it came to African American history. And I mean, it still is, but we're talking about history. And one of the things is, like, at that time, I mean, I don't want to say a long time ago, but there was a time when that area of the city, which is called Bronzeville now, was called the Black Belt
Right.
at the time, and that was the area of the city when the majority of African Americans who lived in Chicago lived in that one part of the city, which was the sort of what's called the near South Side, I guess now, and where the Lake Meadows area and close to Sox Park. I mean, that part of the city, and that's where my great grandmother and her family lived. And the last house that they lived in is now a Chicago landmark at 3624 South King Drive.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm working on to help keep the history of Bronzeville alive and help people know everything that happened in that part of the city when it comes to my ancestor is, now that the Ida B. Wells homes are gone, I'm working with a committee called the Ida B. Wells Commemorative Art Committee, and we have commissioned Richard Hunt, who is a Chicago native, and he is a world-renowned sculptor, to create a monument to honor Ida B. Wells. And he has an amazing, idea of what he wants to do. It will be interpretive and it would be abstract art, which is his signature, but it would also, on the basis of the pieces that he plans to do, will have etchings of what Ida B. Wells actually looked like, and some biographical information and some excerpts of her writing.
That's great.
And the location will be at 37th and Langley. There's a plaza area in that part of what is now called Oakwood Shores. And so the ultimate idea, when they come to Bronzeville tours or tours of the south side of Chicago, is that people can see the Camp Douglas site, they can see the Ida B. Wells homes, they can see the future Ida B. Wells monument, as well as the various other things that are in Bronzeville.
Right. And I recently took a group of teachers from the Betty Shabazz International Charter School on a tour of Bronzeville, a walking tour, and they said, I've driven by here many, many times and never knew all this stuff was here.
Absolutely.
So it's really a treasure. And I really thank you for joining me today and look forward to publishing our book together.
Yes,
Thanks.
I do too. Thank you so much, Bernard.